Mary Gonzalez, a petite woman with 20 years' experience working in a prestigious establishment, never shouted at work. But today, as she entered the Honeymoon suite on the 4th floor, she saw something that changed her life forever. The girl with the brown hair was lying on the floor with her arms spread out in a pool of dried blood. Her white silk robe, soaked in burgundy, resembled an eerie abstract painting. Her eyes, wide open, stared up at the ceiling with a frozen expression of wonder. 43 minutes later, Detective Jack Morrison crossed the threshold of the room. His bulky figure, clad in a rumpled gray suit, seemed too massive for the elegant interior. Morrison, a man of 52 with deep wrinkles on his face and graying temples, had been on the force for nearly 30 years. Every line on his face could tell the story of another investigation. Every premature gray hair the story of a sleepless night over a particularly difficult case. He looked around the room slowly, soaking up the details like a sponge. His gaze lingered on the broken window. The shards of glass glistened on the carpet, reflecting the morning light. The bedside table was overturned, an expensive vase smashed, the TV shifted out of place. An overturned suitcase with clothes strewn about, drawers of a dresser pulled out, all pointed to a robbery gone awry. Classic case, Morrison thought. The robber didn't expect anyone to be in the room. The victim resisted, and the situation got out of hand. But something about the picture made him uneasy. Perhaps the excessive brutality. 12 shots when 1 or 2 were enough to kill. It spoke of rage, of a personal vendetta, not the panic of a random robber. Victim's papers? He asked a young officer taking notes in the corner of the room. Emily West, 28 years old, he said. Arrived yesterday with her husband, Ryan West. Honeymoon. Morrison nodded, mentally noting the bitter irony. The beginning of a life together that had turned tragic. He continued his examination, careful not to step on any signs of a struggle. 12 shell casings from 9 caliber cartridges scattered around the room. The medical examiner, bent over the body, tentatively determined the time of death to be between midnight and 2 in the morning. Where's the husband? Morrison asked. In the staff room, 1st floor. He was found in the lobby around 6 a.m., semi-conscious. As they rode down in the elevator, Morrison went over the options in his head. The husband is always the first suspect, especially when violence of this intensity is involved. But the broken window and signs of forced entry suggested a different scenario. It was too early to draw conclusions. Ryan West sat with his hands on his head. He was a tall, athletic man in his 30s, with close-cropped blonde hair and a 3-day stubble. Expensive but wrinkled shirt. A stain on the cuff, perhaps blood. Morrison mentally noted it. Mr. West, the detective began, taking a seat across from him. I'm Detective Jack Morrison. I'm very sorry about what happened to your wife. Ryan raised his head. His eyes were red, his face swollen. You have to find out who did this, he said in a hoarse voice. We've been saving for this vacation for 3 years. Emily wanted so much to... He paused, his shoulders shaking. Morrison gave him time to collect himself. Whether the grief was real or an act of skill remained to be seen. Tell me what happened last night, he asked softly. Ryan ran his hand over his face. We had dinner at the hotel restaurant. Then we went to the beach, came back around 11. I had a business meeting scheduled via video link. Even on vacation, I can't get away from work. My partner and I are launching a startup, and we've been working like hell the last few months. Emily understood, but she was still upset. We had a little argument, and I went to the lobby so I wouldn't disturb her sleep. What time was that? Around midnight. The conference went on long, then I had a drink at the bar. I got back probably around 3 a.m., but I didn't want to wake Emily, so I went down to the lobby to sleep. Figured I'd apologize in the morning. His voice shook. I didn't even say goodbye to her. Morrison watched every movement, every emotion on the man's face. The story sounded plausible, but there are always nuances. Could anyone confirm you were in the lobby? The bartender, maybe, and a couple other guests. I was sitting in the far corner with my laptop. Morrison nodded, making a note in his notebook. Did you notice anything suspicious? Anyone who showed interest in your room or your wife? Ryan shook his head. No, nothing like that. We've only been here a day. Back at the scene, Morrison met the hotel owner, Thomas Greer, an elegant man in an expensive suit with perfectly styled gray hair. glanced nervously at the police tape blocking the hallway. "Nothing like this has ever happened here before," he said, shaking the detective's hand. "The Côte d'Azur is a hotel with an impeccable reputation. I personally monitor the security system." "And yet someone broke into the room through the fourth-floor window," Morrison said. Greer frowned. "It's impossible without outside help. There are no balconies, just a narrow ledge. Or without help from the inside," Morrison said. "What can you say about the West couple?" The hotelier paused, as if weighing each word. "They checked in yesterday around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Honeymoon, they said. But to be honest, they didn't look like typical happy newlyweds." "What do you mean?" "The tension between them. She was too, nervous." He seemed annoyed. "You know, I've been in this business 30 years, seen a lot of couples. This one was weird." Morrison mentally noted this observation. Thomas Greer had the impression of a perceptive man. "Anything else unusual?" "Yes, perhaps." Greer lowered his voice. "Mrs. Emily West received some kind of envelope at the front desk last night, around 10 o'clock. She got very excited, even pale, and quickly hid it in her purse. Mr. West was on the phone off to the side at the time and didn't notice. A new detail, possibly significant." Morrison made another note. "I'll need the security footage. Of course, it's all yours." The last people Morrison talked to that day were the hotel employees who worked the night shift. Especially valuable was the testimony of the night porter, Alex Doyle, a nervous young man with attentive eyes. "At the beginning of 1 in the morning, I heard loud voices coming from their room," he reported. "I didn't want to eavesdrop, but it was my area of responsibility, so I walked down the hall to see if everything was all right." "What exactly did you hear?" Morrison asked. A woman's voice, very excited. "You must know the truth." And a man's, I think Mr. West's, "What the hell are you talking about?" Then something shattered and the woman screamed, "Please let me explain." I was about to knock, but the door opened and Mr. West came out. He was very angry. He said everything was fine and took the elevator down. I didn't see him again until morning. "What about Mrs. Emily West? Did you hear anything after that?" Alex shook his head. "No, it was quiet. I thought she had gone to bed or was crying quietly. Family quarrels happen, especially with newlyweds. If I'd known..." He lowered his gaze. By evening, sitting in his office, Morrison was poring over the facts, trying to piece together a coherent picture. 12 shots fired, excessive violence indicating personal involvement. The broken window and the mess in the room were signs of a robbery. Spousal altercation shortly before the murder. The victim's strange behavior upon receipt of the envelope. Too many inconsistencies for a simple robbery gone wrong. Morrison sensed there was something more complicated behind the crime. A secret, perhaps related to what Emily wanted to tell her husband. "You must know the truth." The phrase kept him uneasy. What truth was Emily West hiding? And was that truth worth 12 bullets? Detective Morrison's office on the second floor of the police station was like a chaotic little museum of unsolved cases. The walls, papered with notes, photographs, and diagrams, told the stories of victims waiting for justice. In the middle of this organized mess, Jack Morrison sat staring at a computer monitor. Tired eyes slowly scanned the information on Emily West. 36 hours had passed since the body had been discovered, but something about the case kept him on his toes. Examining the victim's biography, he found strange inconsistencies. Emily West, 28 years old, was born in Portland, Oregon. Then moved to New York City, where she worked at a fashion magazine. Met Ryan West at a charity event 2 years ago. But until she was 22, there was virtually no information about her. It was like she'd come out of nowhere. Morrison rubbed the bridge of his nose. 12 shots, excessive violence. The killer didn't just want to kill, he wanted to destroy. What could have caused such rage? The phone rang, interrupting his train of thought. "Morrison," he answered. "Detective, this is the duty officer. You have a visitor, Samantha Clark. Says she's a friend of the victim's. Show her in." A few minutes later, a tall, slender woman with short, dark hair appeared in the office. Her usually flawless makeup was smeared with tears, and her hands nervously rubbed the strap of a designer bag. Samantha had been on the first flight out of New York after learning of Emily's death. "Miss Clark," Morrison pointed to the chair across from her. Thank you for agreeing to talk. I still can't believe it. Samantha's voice shook. We talked to her the day before yesterday. She was so happy. Were you close to Mrs. Emily West? We've been friends since she moved to New York. I worked at the same magazine. We hit it off right away. I was a bridesmaid in their wedding. Morrison watched the woman carefully, noting the genuine grief in her eyes. Miss Clark, in the course of my investigation, I found some, inconsistencies in Emily's biography, especially prior to her 22 years of age. Samantha froze, her gaze stopping on the photograph of Emily on the detective's desk. I don't know what you mean, she said uncertainly. I think you do, Morrison said softly. There are no cameras here. This is a private conversation. I'm trying to find out who killed your friend. To do that, I need to know everything. A long pause hung in the air. Samantha stared out the window as if weighing every word. Do you promise that this information will only be used for the investigation? She finally asked. I promise. Samantha took a deep breath. Until she was 22, Emily was Eric Westbrook. She is a transgender woman, underwent a full transition, including surgery, before she even moved to New York. Morrison kept a neutral expression on his face, but in his head the pieces of the mosaic were beginning to fit together into a coherent picture. Did Ryan know about this? No. Samantha shook her head. She'd never told him. She was afraid of his reaction. Ryan is pretty conservative about some things. But they'd been together for 2 years. They were married. How could she hide something like that? You don't understand, Samantha sounded bitter. For Emily, her past life as Eric was over. She was a woman physically, legally, in every sense. She didn't think she was cheating on Ryan. She just didn't share the painful part of her story. But sooner or later the truth always comes out, Morrison pointed out. She was going to tell him, Samantha replied quietly. On the honeymoon, said she'd picked the perfect moment. A private hotel room so they'd have space to talk. Believed their love would prove stronger than prejudice. There was a heavy silence in the office. Morrison remembered the words he had heard the night porter say, You must know the truth. Did anyone else know about her past? He asked. Just me and her doctors. Emily had severed all ties to her old life, even changed her name long before she met Ryan. After Samantha left, Morrison sat for a long time, lost in thought. He imagined Emily living in constant fear that her secret would come out. Years of building a new life, falling in love with a man she feared might reject her because of her past. She finally decided to open up to him and was murdered that very night. Coincidence? Morrison didn't believe in coincidence. The next step was to re-interview Ryan West. When Morrison entered the interrogation room, Ryan looked even worse than before. Unshaven, eyes red from sleeplessness, wearing the same crumpled shirt. Mr. West, Morrison began, sitting down across from him. I appreciate you agreeing to answer questions again. Did you find the killer? Ryan asked with hope in his voice. We're working on it, but first I'd like to clarify some details. What do you know about your wife's past? Before she moved to New York? Ryan frowned. Not much. She didn't like to talk about her childhood. Said she had a complicated relationship with her parents. I didn't insist. Everyone has painful subjects. Did you know your wife was born a man? Morrison watched Ryan's reaction carefully. Shock, disbelief, confusion. Emotions quickly replaced each other on his face. What the hell is that? He blurted out. Is this some kind of sick joke? I'm afraid not, Mr. West. We have a reliable source confirming that Emily West was Eric Westbrook until the age of 22. Ryan turned pale. His hands began to tremble. That's impossible. We were close. I would have known. Modern medicine works wonders, Morrison said softly. A complete transition, including surgery, then a change of identity. Ryan shook his head, as if trying to push away a nightmare. So the last 2 years, our whole life was a lie? She was going to tell you the truth on this trip, Morrison said. The night porter heard you arguing. She said, You must know the truth. Ryan covered his face with his hands. God, I remember that. But I thought she wanted to confess to cheating or something. I was so angry I didn't even let her finish. I left. And now she's dead. Morrison stared at the broken man, trying to determine, was this a real shock or a skillful game? Could Ryan have found out the truth, gone back to the room and shot his wife in a fit of rage, and then stage a robbery? Do you own a gun, Mr. West? No, never, Ryan answered, lifting his crying face. I hate guns. Morrison nodded, making a note in his notebook. The ballistics test was still inconclusive, but he still wasn't convinced of Ryan's innocence. Back at the hotel, Morrison got permission to do a thorough search of the room. The forensics team had already taken most of the physical evidence, but the detective wanted to see the crime scene in person. Sometimes intuition can help you spot things even seasoned experts miss. In the woman's makeup bag, under the double bottom, he found a thick envelope. Opening it, Morrison saw medical documents, hormone therapy reports, psychiatrists' reports, before and after photos, everything that corroborated Emily West's story of transgender transition. The documents bore the seals of the Portland clinic. But more interesting was the note attached to the documents. He deserves to know the truth about who he is bonded with, or I will tell him myself. The note wasn't signed. Someone was blackmailing Emily, threatening to reveal her secret to her husband. Someone from her past life? Maybe an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend who found out about her new happy life? Or someone who had access to her medical records? Morrison called Samantha. Miss Clark, Emily received a threatening envelope the night of the murder. Could someone from her past have had a motive to hurt her? I don't know, Samantha answered after a pause. She'd made a complete break with her old life, but she had an ex-boyfriend, even before the transition. I think his name was Brian. She mentioned that he was very angry when she told him about her plans. New lead. Morrison made a note to check on this Brian. Late that night, the detective returned to the crime room, trying to reconstruct the chronology of events. Turning on his flashlight, he slowly walked around the room, visualizing the last moments of Emily West's life. She was alone in the room. Her husband had left after an argument, probably without giving her a chance to explain. She had received a threatening envelope, probably knew her secret was about to come out, prepared for the worst. Then someone came. Through the window, 4th floor, difficult but possible for a trained person. Or through the door. Maybe she let the killer in. A familiar face from the past. There was a struggle, overturned furniture, broken things. She tried to defend herself. She didn't have time. The first shot was probably at close range, right in the chest. But the killer didn't stop. 11 more shots, methodical, ruthless. He fired even as she lay lifeless on the floor. Bullets entered the body from multiple angles. You can't do this to me! You thought you could just erase the past? Look what you made me do! Morrison could almost hear the words echoing off the walls, unintelligible phrases spoken through clenched teeth. Whose voice was that? Who was holding the gun? The killer hated the victim. Knew her well enough to feel such an overwhelming rage, then most likely staged the robbery, overturned drawers, threw things around. A professional robber wouldn't make such a fuss. This was an amateur job. 12 shots, 12 chances to be heard, 12 expressions of hatred. Who could have wanted Emily West dead so badly that he'd risked his freedom? Morrison turned off the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. The answer was somewhere nearby, within these walls, absorbing the victim's last scream. And he would find it. Because right now, this whole scene was just his guesses and fictions. Thursday morning greeted Jack Morrison with a call from the crime lab. The ballistics report lay on his desk amidst unfinished coffee and crime scene photos. Turning the first page, he immersed himself in the details that might bring him closer to a clue. 12 shots had been fired from the same gun. A 9 caliber Glock semi-automatic, unregistered, probably purchased illegally. The weapon was not recovered at the scene. According to the report, the shooter was at different distances from the victim during the shooting. The first shots from 3 to 4 meters, the subsequent ones, almost at point-blank range. The killer moved around the room, stalking the victim. Morrison was particularly interested in analyzing the gunpowder residue. Not a single fingerprint of the potential killer was found at the crime scene, not on the shell casings, not on the doorknobs, not on the window frame. The killer was probably wearing gloves, indicating premeditation. This was not a spontaneous crime in a fit of rage. Someone came prepared. Another mystery is the lack of forced entry marks on the room door. Emily either knew the killer and let him in, or he had a key, and the broken window. Morrison was becoming more and more convinced that it was an element of staging. Leaning back in his chair, the detective rubbed the bridge of his nose. This whole story seemed more and more confusing to him. Samantha Clark had mentioned an ex-boyfriend of Eric Westbrook's named Brian, who might have held a grudge. It was a thread worth pulling. By noon, Morrison had managed to find the information. Brian Foster, 33 years old, had lived in Portland until 2 years ago, then moved to Los Angeles. Worked as a computer programmer for a technology company. No criminal record, just a couple speeding tickets. And best of all, he flew into town the day before Emily was killed. 3 hours later, Brian Foster was sitting in an interrogation room. A tall, lean man with thin-rimmed glasses and a tense stare. His hands, with the long fingers of a pianist, drummed restlessly on the table. "Mr. Foster," Morrison began, watching the man's reaction. "Did you know Eric Westbrook?" Brian flinched at hearing that name. "Yes, we dated for about a year, 8 years ago. Then we broke up." "When did you find out that Eric had become Emily?" "About a year after we broke up. A mutual acquaintance told me." "How did you feel about that?" Brian shrugged, but his eyes showed the tension. Surprised, of course. But I'd always known there was something wrong with Eric. He was never happy in his body. "Did you keep in touch with Emily after her transition?" "No. She severed all ties to the past." Morrison stepped forward, scrutinizing Brian's face. "Then explain why you flew to this city the day before she was killed?" Brian turned pale. "It was coincidence. I'm here for work, a developer conference. 4 blocks from the hotel where Emily and her husband were staying." "I didn't know where they were staying," Brian exclaimed. "I didn't know they were in town at all." Morrison silently placed a photograph on the table, a frame from the hotel's surveillance camera. It showed a man who looked like Brian standing near the front desk the day before the murder. "That's you, Mr. Foster. You were at the Azure Hotel the night Emily received the mysterious threatening envelope." Brian covered his face with his hands. "I didn't threaten her. I just wanted to talk." "About what?" "I happened to see their wedding announcement on social media 6 months ago, recognized her despite the changes, and realized that her husband probably didn't know the truth. It just didn't seem right." "So you decided to reveal her secret?" Morrison had already seen the motive forming. A spurned lover seeking revenge, ruining his ex-lover's happiness. "No," Brian slammed his fist on the table. "I wanted to convince her to tell her husband. That's why I gave her those documents to remind her that the truth always comes out. I didn't want to hurt her." Morrison leaned back in his chair, thinking about what he had heard. "Where were you between midnight and 2 a.m. on the day of the murder?" "In my hotel room, alone." "Is there anyone who can confirm that?" Brian shook his head. "I ordered dinner for the room around 11. No other contact. Unreliable alibi." Morrison made a mental note to check the records of the hotel where Foster was staying. After the interview, the detective met Ryan West in the hallway of the precinct. He was waiting for him, pacing nervously back and forth. "That's him, isn't it?" Ryan asked, pointing to the room where Brian had just been interrogated. Eric's boyfriend?" "We're checking all leads, Mr. West," Morrison replied cautiously. "I know it's him," Ryan insisted. "Some resentful person from the past who couldn't accept the fact that Eric had become Emily and was happy with me." Morrison watched Ryan carefully. He seemed genuinely convinced of Brian's guilt, but something in his demeanor alarmed the detective. Too eager to point to another suspect? Back in his office, Morrison took a long look at the case file. He had 2 suspects in front of him: Brian Foster, a former lover with a possible revenge motive, and Ryan West, a husband who might have been furious when he learned the truth about his wife. Neither had an ironclad alibi for the time of the murder. Both had a motive. After much deliberation, Morrison made a decision. He would go for the bluff, press both suspects at the same time in the hope that the real killer would break. The next day, he set up a confrontation. Ryan and Brian sat in the interrogation room, exchanging tense glances. Morrison entered, holding a thick folder. "Gentlemen," he began, placing the folder on the table. "We have new evidence. A security camera in the hotel corridor, which we didn't know existed before, recorded a man entering Emily's room shortly before the murder. It was a bluff. No such camera existed. Also, forensics found microscopic traces of DNA on one of the casings. The results of the analysis would be ready in an hour." He looked at both men carefully, searching for signs of fear or nervousness. Brian looked worried, but not panicked. Ryan, on the other hand, turned pale, his hands beginning to shake. "I think we should talk in private, Mr. West," Morrison said, pointing to the door. In the next room, Ryan collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "I didn't mean to do it," he whispered. "I swear I didn't plan to kill her." Morrison turned on the recorder. "Tell us what happened that night, Mr. West." "After our fight, I actually left. I was so angry I couldn't be around her." Ryan spoke softly, staring into the void. "I had a drink at the bar, but the alcohol only made me angrier. All those months of planning the wedding, our plans for the future, and then she says she has something to tell me. Something important. Did you know what it was?" "No, then no. I assumed it was cheating or something like that." Ryan grinned bitterly. "I came back to the room around 2:30 in the morning. I wanted to find out everything. She was sitting on the bed with some papers. When she saw me, she started crying, apologizing. Then she showed me the pictures, the papers." Morrison saw Ryan reliving that moment. Shock, disbelief, rage. "I couldn't believe it. The woman I loved, the woman I wanted to spend my life with, have children with, was a man? It seemed like some kind of sick joke. What did you do?" "At first, I just yelled. Called him a cheat, a fraud. She cried, tried to explain that physically she was fully a woman, that her past didn't matter." Ryan shook his head. "But all I saw were lies. 2 years of lies. Our marriage built on deception. When did you decide to kill her?" "I didn't," Ryan exclaimed. "It just, happened. I was about to leave, packing my things, and then she told me that she would always love me, that deep down I would love her too, because true love sees the soul, not the body." He clenched his fists. "That was the last straw. It was like she was mocking me, my feelings, my pain. Where did you get the gun?" "I had a contact, a guy who sells guns without papers. I'd called him before, back when my partner and I were launching the business and getting threats from competitors." Ryan lowered his gaze. "I left the hotel, met him in an alley 2 blocks away. Came back 15 minutes later. She was still there, packing her things, thinking I was gone for good." "Do you remember the moment of the murder itself?" Ryan closed his eyes, as if trying to shut out the memories. "It's like a blur. I remember walking in. She turned around, saw the gun, and turned pale. She said, 'Ryan, please don't.' And then it was like I was watching from the outside. First shot. She fell to her knees, holding her chest. I kept firing even when she was on the floor. I couldn't stop. Every shot was like a release from the pain and betrayal." 12 shots, Morrison said quietly. "Why so many?" "Out of ammo," Ryan answered simply. "The clip was empty." "What did you do then?" "I realized what I'd done. Panicked. I decided to stage a robbery. Knocked over furniture, broke a window, threw the gun in the river on my way out of the hotel. Then he went down to the lobby and pretended he'd been there all night." He looked up at the detective. "I loved her. I really did. But what she did, her deception, I felt so humiliated, used." Morrison wrote down his confession. He saw before him not a monster, but a broken man whose world had crumbled overnight. It didn't justify murder, but it helped him understand how an ordinary person could cross the line between love and hate. 6 months later, Jack Morrison sat in a courtroom listening to the verdict. Ryan West was found guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. 12 gunshots, demonstrating extreme brutality, left the jury with no choice. 25 years without parole. As the judge read the verdict, Morrison watched Ryan. He looked detached, as if resigned to his fate. There was no remorse or protest in his eyes, just the emptiness of a man who had lost everything. After the hearing, Morrison met Samantha Clark outside the courthouse. She looked haggard, aged over the months. "Justice has been served," she said, but there was no satisfaction in her voice. Nothing would bring Emily back, though. Why didn't she tell him sooner? Morrison asked the question that had plagued him all this time. Before the wedding? Before their lives had become so intertwined? Fear, Samantha answered simply. Fear of rejection. Fear of losing the love of her life. She told me she'd tried several times, but each time something stopped her, and then it was too late. They stood on the courthouse steps, each absorbed in his own thoughts. Morrison was thinking about that thin line that separates love from hate. One revelation, one moment of truth, and a loving husband turned into a cold-blooded killer. You know what the saddest part is? He said, looking up at the gray autumn sky. If she had told him in the beginning, perhaps he would have accepted it. But years of deception, even well-intentioned, had destroyed any possibility of forgiveness. You can't know for sure, Samantha objected. Maybe he couldn't accept the truth anyway. She was afraid for good reason. Morrison nodded. They would never know how things might have turned out. The case had left a deep imprint on him, not so much because of the brutality of the crime, but because of the tragic predestination of the whole story. Two people who loved each other were trapped in fears, secrets, and prejudices. When Samantha left, Morrison stood on the steps for a long time, watching the people passing by. How many secrets did they carry within them? How many unspoken words and hidden truths stand between them and their loved ones? And how often does silence, meant to protect love, end up destroying it? 12 gunshots echoed in his mind. 12 moments when love had turned into its absolute opposite. But where exactly that transition had taken place? At what moment one feeling had given way to the other? Even an experienced detective with 30 years of experience could not tell.